Well, appreciated that. While we're and thank you for the kind introduction. And first and foremost, thank you to everyone for taking the time to hear my story and what the Hummingbird Alliance is about. So I guess good afternoon, good evening, or if you're traveling internationally, good morning to wherever you're joining this call from. So I'm fortunate to be joined here with Samantha, who's the executive director for our non-for-profit. When we get a chance, we'll share a few slides with you, but obviously, I know we only have about 15 minutes, so really want to highlight both why we started the non-for-profit organization, the Hummingbird Alliance, in honor of our 7-year-old son, Alex, and candidly, what an important role you all play out in the field, for lack of a better term, to prevent these tragedies from happening again across the country. So if we go to the next page, or actually the first page of the deck, let me just start off with a little bit about our story. So actually on the next page, you'll see this is my son, Alex, and he was killed at his school coming up on about 6 years ago in December of 2019. He was a student at Mark Day Elementary School, which is a school here in San Rafael, California. For those of you not familiar with the Bay Area, it's just north of the Golden Gate Bridge once you cross over from San Francisco into Marin. And Alex was killed when he was playing football at recess. And like any first grade boy, he was out playing football with friends, and the school had installed a large perimeter fence in response to Sandy Hook, which had occurred a few years prior. And so as you can imagine, given the epidemic we face as a country with school shootings and the fear that puts in parents' eyes, a lot of school professionals, administrators, principals, et cetera, have sought to put in large fences and gates to protect their students from unintended intruders. So my son was actually next to this gate. Now, unfortunately, the school had built the gate without a permit. So we'll get into, how we can obviously educate schools going forward. But basically what happened is he was next to a 30-foot cantilever gate, which is just a fancy way of saying a gate that rolls along in a parallel fashion to a fence. And that gate became detached from the fence. Given it was so long, it weighed 30 feet. It was, 30 foot in length, about 8 feet in height, weighed about 400 pounds. It fell on my son, and at the risk of being too graphic, because it hit him in the back of the head, he went into cardiac arrest and died right there on the playground. So obviously, after a tragedy like this, my wife and I and our extended family were clearly looking for just, purpose in our life in terms of how to honor Alex. And so we started the Hummingbird Alliance in honor of Alex shortly thereafter. One of the first things we discovered, if you go to the next page, is that unfortunately, even though we felt all alone at the time of our loss, we were not the first family who had actually lost a child or a loved one to a falling gate. So this is a map that candidly my wife and I put together with the help of Google. And so by no way, shape, or means do I want to advertise this is necessarily a complete map of all the incidences that have occurred across the country, but it certainly gives you a sense of the magnitude of the problem from falling gates. So I'll touch upon a few of these incidences without going into too much detail. So my son, Alex, that's the incident there in California in San Rafael, December 2019. The area I highlighted here in orange, this is also another case that has garnered some national news. This was another child at Centennial Elementary School in Tucson, Arizona. She was helping a school teacher close a gate that was outside of a dumpster area where a garbage truck would pick up canisters. That gate became detached, very similar to my son's death, fell on her, and she died the week before Thanksgiving in 2023. Up in Washington, this was a young boy outside of a church synagogue. Much like schools, the Jewish community has always looked for peace of mind through, increased security and fencing perimeters. And this boy went to close a gate outside of his church synagogue. The gate became decoupled from the fence, fell on him, and killed him as well outside of Mukilteo, which is just north of Seattle. Last incident I'll highlight is this was actually quite a national case in terms of news awareness. And I'll get into the mechanics of the gate here in a second. But in Moab, Utah, for those of you who are familiar with Arches National Park, there was a woman and her newlywed husband. They were on their honeymoon at Arches National Park. A very standard vehicular gate was closed in the closed position as they arrived at the park at 8:55. They got there a few minutes early. While they're waiting for the park ranger to actually open up the gate, a strong gust of wind blew the gate through the windshield of the car. And again, at the risk of sounding too graphic, it actually decapitated the woman right in front of her newlywed. And they had to have a massive lawsuit with the state of Utah and the federal parks that oversee the gate. Arches National Park. So you can see here on this page about 13 deaths without going into too much detail, just across the country from malfunctioning gates. Probably more germane for this group. Part of our advocacy work included a petition to California OSHA here in my home state of California, where we asked them to look into the applicable OSHA regulations that govern the construction and design of these gates. As part of that petition to advance the necessary requirements for safety, they actually went back since 1990 using their OSHA database, which, as you know, is where you maintain workplace accidents of record. And they actually uncovered 48 severe injuries or fatalities. So not all deaths, about 12 of those 48 were deaths. But this ranged from broken hands to broken ribs, again, from these large falling gates that if someone is not able to get out of the way when it is falling to the ground at the speed of gravity, clearly lead to death, or in the case of many of these workers, maybe a broken rib or a broken pelvis. So while clearly these tragedies are hard to stomach, especially for a parent, or the idea of losing a loved one to such a simple device as a gate, if you go to the next page in our presentation, you'll see the solution is actually very simple to prevent these tragedies. So let me work through the bottom of this page, left to right, to give you a sense of how we can stop these tragedies from happening again. So the bottom left, this is the gate that fell on my son. Like I said before, about 30 feet in length. The reason it was so long is that it was a manual vehicular gate that was designed not only for cars to get in and out of the back of the school where the playground was and the defined perimeter was that I alluded to before in response to Sandy Hook, but also to enable a local first responder, i.e. an ambulance, or more importantly, a fire truck, to access the back of the school. The second you necessitate, local ingress and egress requirements for a large fire truck. They need to make wider turns. Wider turns lead to larger gates. Larger gates lead to heavier weight. Heavier weight leads to more risk of fatality when it fails. Second picture is what's called a fall stop post. This was a faulty fall stop post that had been designed by the contractor. You can see here that at a 45-degree angle, it no longer acted as an actual stop to prevent the gate from running any further down the actual fence line in a parallel fashion, but it actually turned the wheels of the gate into a ramp, which, without going into too many of the mechanics, since the gate rolled along the fence, when the wheels on the gate that were attached to keep it adhered to the fence hit this fall stop post, it actually lifted it up out of the air, which then allowed it to become decoupled and to fall on my son. Last picture I'll highlight on this page is actually where the cursor is pointed right now. This area circled in red is basically the part that my wife and I have been advocating as needed for all large gates, whether they be manual, vehicular, or automatic. This essentially is a fall stop post, or in a very fancy technical term, just think of this as a catching mechanism. So this upside down L, which is about a $20 to $50 part, can be installed at the time of installation of a gate or a fence, or even afterwards as a retrofit. Takes about an hour to install. It's just a piece of metal welded to a gate. What that does is, you can imagine the visual. If that gate that you see here in this picture had inadvertently become detached from a fence, it would not fall all the way to the ground. It would fall into this catching mechanism, which would obviously prevent the gate from crushing anybody. It would just fall into the piece of metal and keep it from causing any fatalities. At its most basic level, it's the same principle as a doorstop in your home. Anything to prevent a certain physical device from moving past a point of no return. This that we've been advocating for to groups like yourselves, if you go to the next slide, is actually already recommended by a set of standards that you are familiar with, I assume, in your profession. So I assume many of you are familiar with ASTM. As you know, ASTM is a voluntary set of technical standards. It's not required by law. My wife and I are trying to change that, but we're clearly not there yet on a national level. But basically, these engineers who design these ASTM standards have incorporated the recommendation in F900, F1800, and F2200 into the design of large cantilever gates for manual gates as well as automatic gates. However, it's not required by building code yet, nor are many people even aware of these requirements, such as yourselves when they're doing home inspections. Last thing I'll mention on this page is we've been doing some work with the U.S. Consumer Safety Commission. They actually had an advocacy campaign focused on automatic gates back in the early 2000s. It was called Operation SafeGate. Automatic gates were killing children. You can imagine those automatic motors that power the opening or closing of a gate. If there's a certain entrapment zone without a sensor, just like a garage door sensor at your house, a child may unknowingly be in an area of life or death. There were children dying from these automatic gates, and so the Consumer Protection Safety Commission put out these notices. Unfortunately, they didn't cover manual gates like the one that killed my son. So to make it very simple, basically the gate that killed my son was open and closed by a human being versus a motorized mechanism like you might see at a parking garage. If you go to the next slide, in terms of where we're actually very fortunate here with the Hummingbird Alliance, I don't know if he's joined, but Dave Monsieur from DASMA has been a champion for our efforts and has partnered with our organization to raise national awareness. We've spent a lot of time with ASTM, who clearly can't lobby for legislation given their federal designation, but they've been supportive of the legislation we've introduced in front of the U.S. Senate, which is now sitting with Ted Cruz and his committee. And then finally, candidly, we're very blessed to also have the support of the American Fence Association. This is me as a younger man in 2023 delivering the keynote speech at Oklahoma City at their national conference. For those of you who aren't aware, the American Fence Association is the largest association of trade professionals in the country, about 1,400 members across 13 geographic chapters. And they've been really championing our cause of just making both industry professionals, such as fence installers, and then customers aware of this basic need to have this $50 safety device. And so I know I might be running short on time. If we go to the last slide, basically the ask here is pretty simple. So whether I make this at a legislative effort or whether I make it to a group such as yourselves who are actually out in the ground and come across these gates in your daily experience, the cost of these devices that are literally the difference between life and death. Again, just to reiterate, it's a $20 to $50 part, depending on where you are in the country, maybe an hour of labor. So all in $200 can literally be the difference between life and death. Because the thing to remember with these gates is if they can move, just like a train on a track, when the proverbial wheels come off the track, it can be the difference between life and death if there's a human being, whether it be a child or an adult sitting next to that gate when it's falling at the speed of gravity. So happy to answer any questions about our organization if that's part of the protocol, or if not, mostly just appreciate your willingness to listen and to help spread our message about safety and awareness to your local communities. Thank you very much.